it's a good thing that Abraham did lie in the story. All right, welcome to episode 3 of the Mirror Scriptura podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the Abraham cycle, which is part of the Mirror Reading the Elohist source. So this is part 2. So item number 1, who was the father of Isaac? Was it Abraham or was it Abimelech? So there were those out there who were saying that Abimelech was the father of Isaac, and so the Elohist is responding to that and trying to convince the original readers that Abraham was the father of Isaac. So if you remember, Abraham had traveled down to Gerar, I think that's how you say it, and Abimelech was the king there. And so people were saying, hey, look, Sarah was married to Abimelech, and Abraham couldn't have been married to Sarah because Sarah was Abraham's sister. And so the Elohist is responding by continuously pointing out that Sarah is Abraham's wife, and the whole Abimelech thing was just a big misunderstanding, and that he only said that Sarah was his sister because he was afraid. And so the Elohist tries to clear that whole thing up. And then you have Isaac and Abraham continuously referring to each other as father and son. And we don't really pick up on that because it's kind of that Bible language, that old King James language that we just think that's part of how people talk. But if somebody said, like somebody today said, my father, can I borrow the car tonight? And then the father said, yes, my son. And then, thank you, my father. And then, you're welcome, my son. Like, that's really obvious. Like, you're trying to show that they're father and son. And that is what is happening in the Abraham cycle, as the Elohist continually stresses that Isaac is Abraham's son and not Abimelech. And furthermore, that Isaac is Abraham's only son. So you have God referring to as Isaac as Abraham's only son, and then you have the whole issue with Hagar and her son, and Abraham expelling her and her son because Isaac was the only son, and so Hagar's son had to be gotten rid of. So the Elohist deals with that and is really stressing that Isaac is Abraham's son and his only son. So next item, item number 3. Why does it matter? Why does it matter if Isaac is Abraham's son or not? Well, it deals with inheritance. So if you're a descendant of Abraham, then you get part of his inheritance, and that has to deal with land as well. So you get a land allotment, and so the Elohist doesn't want that. He doesn't want to share Abraham's inheritance with anybody else except Isaac's descendants. This may be a power play on the part of Abimelech's descendants. So if you remember from previous episode, this takes place in the Northern Kingdom, and this is very early in the Northern Kingdom, and so there hasn't been really a kingly line established yet. And so if these descendants of Abimelech come along and say, hey, we're from a kingly line, maybe we should be, maybe one of our descendants should be the king of this new Northern Kingdom here. And so the Elohist may be trying to prevent that power play from happening as well. Now, I was really confused by this king from Gerar, Abimelech, because Gerar is, I always want to say Gerar, but Gerar was the south of the northern kingdom of Israel, even south of the southern kingdom of Israel. So why is the story taking place pretty far away from the northern kingdom when it's being written in the northern kingdom? And so if you read the text, you can put together that Abimelech's descendants had migrated up north for whatever reason. Maybe Egypt conquered Gerar. They're basically war refugees. Maybe there was a famine there, which is typical in that part of the world, and they needed to migrate to a better place. It doesn't really indicate why the descendants of Abimelech had migrated up to the northern kingdom, but we see a parallel there, and the Elohist, although he's excluding Abimelech's descendants from the inheritance, from the kingly line, he's excluding them from that, but at the same time he wants to maintain peace with them, and he points out that Abraham was an alien when he was in Gerar, and Abimelech treated him well, and they were on friendly terms. And so there's a treaty that's put into place between Abraham and Abimelech that they would be friendly not only to each other but to the descendants of them as well. So, and there may have been some conflicts over wells between Abimelech's descendants and Isaac's descendants, and that is also addressed by the Elohist, and that Abraham had a dispute with Abimelech over a well, and that was resolved in a fair sense. So it may be an appeal to the Israelites to deal, even though they're alien, even though the Abimelech's descendants are aliens in the land, to deal with them fairly and to treat them fairly. All right, item number 4. Abraham served Elohim. So Elohim is the name of God that the Elohist uses. And so the Elohist is trying to argue that Abraham served God throughout his time in Gerar, that he didn't serve another God while he was in Gerar, or actually in Beersheba, I think it was where he lived, but that he was faithful to Elohim the entire time that he was down in that area. And probably the biggest way in that the Elohist tries to prove this is in the sacrifice of Isaac, and that it's Abraham's only son is Abraham is able is willing to sacrifice him because he is so faithful to Elohim. All right, item number 5. Did Abraham kill Isaac? So with the Elohist source, there's no Isaac story after this sacrifice episode. So after the sacrifice account, Isaac just kind of disappears from the Elohist source. And so some speculate that Abraham actually did kill Isaac, because the Elohist source doesn't really say that Abraham didn't kill him. It just said that God said that Abraham was faithful. There's no ram that's provided for. Abraham does say that God would provide, but the ram that shows up is a later addition. And so this is one of the theories of Tima Yore, which I mentioned in the last episode, who was so helpful with the Elohist source. But his conclusion, I think, is wrong, and he thinks that Abraham did kill Isaac. And I say, and in terms of mirror reading, that makes no sense, because the Elohist source for the whole story, just about for the whole Abraham cycle, is trying to prove that Isaac is Abraham's son, because he's dealing with his descendants. He's trying to defend Isaac's descendants, and so if Abraham kills Isaac at the end of the story, that's kind of counterproductive, in my opinion. So I have to disagree with Yore and those that think that Abraham did kill Isaac. Another reason people think that Abraham killed Isaac is that there's these two young men. The Elohist source talks about these two young men that walk most of the way with Abraham and Isaac to the place of sacrifice, and then Abraham's told them to stay behind, and Isaac and Abraham went to the place of sacrifice by themselves. And so, and when Abraham comes back, Isaac isn't with him. It just says Abraham returns to the two young men. So where's Isaac? And so some assume that Abraham killed him. So what's going on there with the two young men? Well, it seems obvious that the Elohist is trying to say that these two young men were not witnesses to Abraham killing Isaac. Yeah, maybe they were there when they went to the sacrifice place, but they didn't actually see Abraham kill Isaac. So they weren't really witnesses. And Elohist is sure to mention that it was just Isaac and Abraham. He makes it very clear that it was only those two that went to the place of sacrifice, and Isaac was the one that carried the wood and the knife. So the two young men didn't actually see Abraham kill Isaac, and so you can't depend on them for their witness testimonies. And from a writer's perspective, from the Elohist perspective, he can't say that Isaac did return with Abraham, because if he did, then there would be no reason for the two young men to say that Abraham had killed them. There'd be no reason for there to be a false narrative that the Elohist is trying to correct, if that makes sense. And so, it's possible that we could be missing part of the Elohist source's story, and depending on how old Isaac was. I know I probably the consensus is that Isaac was an adult at the time. I don't know if I buy that. It's child sacrifice was children usually in the ancient world, but and the evidence for an older Isaac, I think, is suspect. One of the reasons that people think Isaac was older is that Isaac is referred to with the same Hebrew word that the two young men are referred to, so basically putting Isaac as the same age as the two young men. So who knows? But that got me thinking that maybe those two young men in the false argument were the sons of Abraham, and so that's at least that's what they were saying. So the Elohist sources doesn't name these two young men because he wants them to remain anonymous, because he's arguing that they weren't sons of Abraham, that Isaac is the only son of Abraham. Item number 6, theological impact. And I'm just going to single out the part of the story that is spoken of in sermons a lot, and the whole Abraham lying about Sarah being his sister. And this is often brought up as a point of, Abraham was wrong, you shouldn't lie, lying is bad, and if he just would have had faith in God, everything would have been fine. See, if you lie, then you get into these messes. And the whole lying episode is viewed in a negative light. And although the Elohist isn't endorsing lying here, it's a good thing that Abraham did lie in the story, because Abraham lying explains how he can be married to Sarah. It explains the whole sister reference, because the argument that the Elohist source was going against was that Abraham couldn't have been, or Sarah couldn't have been Abraham's wife, because Sarah was his sister. And so the Elohist is explaining this through the whole lying episode. And so for the Elohist and his side of the argument, the whole lying thing is a good thing in terms of what he's trying to argue. And so I think that's interesting, and I think that's I know that the original intent of the author of the Elohist source was not to give this character study of Abraham and how you shouldn't lie. And so I think it's wrong to approach that as the primary meaning of the text, or even the meaning of the text at all. I would just stay with the original author's intent, and that is defending Isaac and defending Abraham and the ways that I described previously. So, I see this Abraham cycle as political propaganda, and everything else is a means to an end. So the lying is, the author doesn't care, at least in the immediate context, whether Abraham lied or not. He just cares that it supports his political propaganda. Alrighty, well, that's it for this episode. Next episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Jacob cycle, and it's going to be really good, so tune in for that.